This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Baruch Ma'aboim. Welcome to tonight's Shiur on Parsha Vayeishev. So a very interesting subject tonight. If this is your first time at the Shiur, tonight's Shiur does not reflect the typical subjects of the Shiur. It's definitely a very out there topic, and we're eventually going to come back to the Parsha. But we begin with a passage in the Sefer Od Yosef Chai. The Od Yosef Chai was written by the Ben Ish Chai. The Ben Ish Chai's name was Rabbi Yosef Chaim of Baghdad. Rabbi Yosef Chaim of Baghdad, Hamechuna Reach Tov. He was called Reach Tov. Why Reach? Reach is Rev Yosef Chaim. Tov, the good one. And he was the preeminent scholar in Iraq, in Baghdad, for 73 years, from the year 1835 to 1909. And he did not hold an official position. He was not in Iraq. The chief rabbi was called Chacham Bashi. He was not officially the Chacham Bashi. He was not officially a Rosh Hashiva or a Rav of a shul. He happened to have been independently wealthy, which is a very large part of why he yielded so much influence, and that is he did not have to come on to anybody. He was not reliant on a position, he was not reliant on a job, he was not reliant on anybody for money, and therefore his word carried a lot of weight. And one of his classic svarim is the Sefer Od Yosef Chai. In Parshas Lech Lecha of all Parshas, he tells the following story. Now the Ben Ish Chai was not only a great makubal, and not only a great posek, and of course his famous svarim, he wrote the Ben Yehoyada and the Agadata of Shas, he wrote the Sefer Ben Ish Chai, he wrote Mekav Tze'el, he wrote Adaras Eliyahu, he wrote many svarim. I have a set at home of about 7 different Sidurim that the Ben Ish Chai composed for different days of the year, Lag BaOmer, the Arizal's yard site, and various other occasions. And the Ben Ish Chai was also a great storyteller. And many of his divrei musar are couched in mishalim that seems that he made them up. But let's begin with one particular incident, an episode that he relates. He starts off on the pasuk in Parshas Lech Lecha, Lech Lecha me'artzecha mi'mayladetecha, and he's bothered by the question. Lech Lecha is repetitious, it's superfluous. There's a lot of kefelos in the pasuk. Me'artzecha, mayladetecha, ve'savicha. So here's the story. He says there was a Chacham Echad, Makubal Gadol, a great Kabbalist. And the government had a pretext against him, and they had trumped up charges against him, and they put him in jail. So here it is, a great rabbi, a great scholar, a great Kabbalist who's put in jail on trumped up charges, and they did not put him in the regular prison cell, but they basically put him in what's called solitary confinement. Nobody was allowed to talk to him, nobody was allowed to go near him, and he was in a very tight quarantine, he was in a very tight cellar, and he remained there for 30 days. After 30 days was over, the prison warden knocks on the door. He says, Rabbi, you've been acquitted, you're free, you could leave. And he went home on day number 31. So this great rabbi goes home, and he's thinking to himself, the night of the 32nd, why did God do this to me? Now, interestingly, B'derach Nes, miraculously, while he's in his prison cell, he has unusual Yishuv Hadas. He has a lot of peace of mind. And he's sitting there without any svarim, learning Kabbalah day and night. And not only is he learning Kabbalah, he's being mechadesh chidushim. And in the prison cell, this rabbi was able to compose an entire sefer of Kabbalah. Miraculously, he had the calmness and the peace of mind and the clarity of thought to be able to learn for 30 consecutive days, uninterrupted. So he gets back home, and the night of the 32nd, he's tossing and turning in bed. Why did God do this to me? Yes, granted, spiritually it was a very good situation. Nobody interfered with me. I had clarity of thought. I had clarity of mind. Nobody bothered me. I had a ruach of kedusha. But physically, it was very painful. Emotionally, it was very painful. Why would God do this to me? If He wanted me to write a sefer on Kabbalah, I could have done it in my living room, on the couch, in comfort. Why did this happen to me? So this rabbi fell asleep. And what happened? Obviously, he had a dream. And in the dream, he sees an old sage, a beautiful looking sage, a majestic looking sage. Either he was from the Bnei Olam Haba, or he was an angel. And this rabbi in the dream comes over to the the sage, and he says, something's bothering me, something's troubling me, I can't get it off my chest. So the sage says, speak your piece. So this Kabbalist says, please explain to me, why did Hashgacha have it that I need to be incarcerated for 30 days? So the sage says, what do you mean, why do you need to be incarcerated? Turn around. And this Kabbalist turns around, and he sees 3 rows of children behind him, all walking, one after the other after the other. They all look identical, and they all look like the sage that this Kabbalist is speaking to. And they were all beautiful children. They're all handsome children. And the sage says, it's because of these children that you had to be incarcerated. And the Kabbalist said, say what? And he said, that's right. These children are Gilgulim, and they were reincarnated as the stones of your prison cell. As we know, that it is possible to come back in a Gilgul as a human being, you could come back as a Gilgul as an animal, you could come back as a plant, or you could come back as a rock. Now, it's best to avoid coming back as a rock. We learned that in the Bracha of Mater Asurim, one of the kavanas to have is, Baruch Hashem that I'm not a rock, because if I would be a rock, it would be a long time until I get out of the matzav. Fine. So the sage told this Makubal, you should know that these 3 rows of children are all from the same shorish of your neshama, and they were trapped in the stones surrounding your prison cell. So, and you're the only one who is able to redeem and to free them. So therefore God made sure and He orchestrated that you should be in this prison, and you should have 30 days of uninterrupted learning of Kabbalah, because only your learning of Kabbalah is able to free and release the souls that were Nizgalgel and the stones of your prison cell. If you would have been at home, you would have been too far away from these children. If you would have been learning other material, you would not have been able to redeem these children. So God orchestrated you were in solitary confinement. If people would have been able to speak to you, it would have taken you 40 days, 50 days, 60 days. God wanted you out of there as soon as possible. These children have been awaiting your arrival for a very, very long time. Recognize, the sage says, that God put you here for your benefit, because all of these children that you redeemed are accredited to you. They are now considered like your children. And the sage told this Kabbalist that you should know until you got here, you don't even want to know what the Goyim were doing in that prison cell. If you want to know exactly, you could look over here. It says, but I'm afraid I don't know who's listening out there, so I can't mention exactly what the Gentiles were doing. But if you need greater detail, you could see for yourself. Okay, Israel? And no, I'm just picking on you because we spoke before the show. So, and this Kabbalist rejoiced greatly over this understanding, over this insight, and he was able to publish a sefer of Kabbalah based on what he learned and revealed, and was mechadesh in the prison cell. Says the holy Ben Ish Chai, this mashal and this story teaches us a very important lesson. You ever wonder, sometimes in life you have to go to places, you have to go to fardarbana places, you have to go to crazy places, right? We had to spend today in the DMV. I don't know how this happens. Someone in my family is applying for a permit. I'm not sure how that's happening exactly, right? So how long does it take to get a permit in New York? It's only a 6-hour process. You go there at 9:30, and you just wait and wait and wait. If you want to know what the United States of America will look like if Bernie Sanders is elected, go to the DMV, okay? And that's Mother Russia, basically. If you want to know, why does God make somebody go to certain places? Why do I have to spend time in certain places? What am I doing there? Why did this happen to me? Here it is. It's completely a fabricated accusation against this Makubal. The answer is, says the Ben Ish Chai, the Mesabiv Kol HaSvivois always orchestrates. You are where you need to be. Sometimes you have to go to places, you have to make a bracha, you have to learn a Dvar Torah, you have to hear a good vart, you have to do a mitzvah in that place. You don't know who you're talking to. You don't know who's in the table. You don't know who the rocks you're stepping on. You don't know who are in the molecules of oxygen. Sometimes you have to go somewhere, make a bracha, just to free some neshama that's nisgalgal there. Therefore, if every act, every breath, every footstep, every place that we go is the kavana, so that we could accomplish something for ourselves, certainly the Ben Ish Chai says that when God told Abraham, leave Canaan, leave Haran and go to Canaan, it was certainly for Abraham's benefit. It was certainly something Abraham needed to accomplish, to gather in various neshamos that have been dispersed all throughout the world. And this is a very well-known concept in Kabbalah. that the Arizal writes about extensively. The Chassam Sofer writes about it in many, many places. The concept of gathering in sparks of Kedusha, which is not the subject of tonight's share. All we know so far is that in Parshas Lech Lecha, the Ben Ish Chai told the story. As far as we're concerned, it's a legend. It never happened. It's a mashal about a great Makubal who was put in jail in solitary confinement, who wrote a sefer of Kabbalah. But we would say this whole story is just an invented parable to bring out a certain point. Okay, put that story in your back pocket. Let's come to the life of the Ben Ish Chai. As we mentioned, the Ben Ish Chai did not hold an official position, was not the Chacham Bashi, was not the chief rabbi of Baghdad, was not a Rosh Hashiva, was not the rabbi of the shul, but he was the preeminent Gadol Hadar of Sephardic Jewry, which included all of Iraq, which included India, which included Singapore, which included the whole Far East. Okay. And as we mentioned, the Ben Ish Chai was independently wealthy. First of all, his wife took care of the finances. His wife took care of his home. His wife took care of all of the affairs of the household. But aside from that, and that is, the Ben Ish Chai had 4 brothers. And actually, we have over here the new official biography on the Ben Ish Chai called, guess what? Ben Ish Chai. And it was collected and overseen by Rabbi Yaakov Hillel, one of the leading Mekubalim today. It's a beautiful coffee table edition, a very expensive edition. Thank Gedalia Schwartz for getting me both in English and in Hebrew. And actually, so there are some things in the English that are not in the Hebrew. And I have a friend who also tried to get me these 2 volumes. They're amazing volumes. Actually, I quoted them many times already. And in the official now, interestingly, many years ago, Rabbi Yaakov Hillel wrote a biography about the Ben Ish Chai. Now, just as an aside, there is 2 disparate mahalchim in the Sephardic world in halacha. Do you follow the Arizal and the Kabbalistic approach, which was sort of the established way of the Ben Ish Chai? And the Ben Ish Chai's approach was accepted in many, many, if not most, Sephardic communities, or the approach of Rabbi Vayeishev. Rabbi Vayeishev holds that Sephardim have to follow the Beis Yosef, the Shulchan Aruch, not the Kabbalistic approach. And the Rabbi Yaakov Hillel would go with the Arizal, and the Chida would say that if the Beis Yosef would have known what the Arizal would have said, the Beis Yosef would have been Chayzer, and the Rabbi Vadi would say, Mehechi Teisi, the Beis Yosef wouldn't have been Chayzer, we follow the Shulchan Aruch. Those are the 2 basically streams of Mahalach HaChaim in the Sephardic world today. So the Rabbi Yaakov Hillel is a very big proponent of elevating the Ben Ish Chai to the highest pedestal, because their whole mahalach in halacha and in way of life is based on the Ben Ish Chai. Now, interestingly, Rabbi Yaakov Hillel is a direct descendant of the leaders of Iraqi Jewry. From his mother's side, he's a direct descendant of, I believe, Rav Nissen Goin. Rav Nissen Goin was... No, not Rav Haigon. He's Dor Achar Dor Rabbeinu Nissen Goin, the Rosh Yeshiva of Bavel. Okay. Now, the Ben Ish Chai had 4 brothers. Their brothers' names were Rabbeinu Nissim, Rav Moshe, Rabbi Cheskel, and Rav Sasson. And they were businessmen. And the Ben Ish Chai was the Bechar. He was the oldest, and he was the greatest Talmid Chacham. And they wanted to support him. So the deal was, they worked and they did business overseas, and they did a lot of business. They had a tremendous business in India. Okay, they had all kinds of stuff going on in India. They had diamonds, they had gold, they had silver, they had all kinds of spices, merchandise. They had a big business going on in India. And out of respect to their great brother, who was world famous, they began to sign everything in the business under his name. Okay, that's the introduction to the story. Dun, 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 right? So you could just imagine, this does not necessarily spell promising news for the Ben Ish Chai. Now, they're wildly successful, extremely wealthy. Ben Ish Chai, first of all, was now extremely wealthy, and most importantly, his major expenses were now all on the house. What were the Ben Ish Chai's major expenses? He was probably the greatest publisher of all time. He published over 100 Svarim. Now, publishing is extremely expensive. Ben Ish Chai had nothing to worry about. Everything was written off the family business. so he had nothing to worry about his personal finances. His publishing was on the house, and moreover, the Ben Ish Chai was mefarnes many Talmidei Chachamim through the income of the business. Okay, one of the well-known darshanim in Baghdad was known by the name of Rabbi Cheskel Ezra Shemaya, who maintained the Talmud Torah. He maintained a children's school. He taught Tinoch Shel Beis Rabban, and he was a great Baal Darshan. He would darshan every Shabbos for 2 hours, and he was a very popular darshan in Baghdad. He never accepted a rabbanus because he was very modest, he was very humble, but he also recorded some of the history of the Ben Ish Chai. So here's what happened. Wherever the brothers go, all around the world, they're signing the checks, Yosef Chaim, Yosef Chaim, Yosef Chaim. Who's Yosef Chaim? Nobody knows. Nobody knows who Yosef Chaim is. Finally, they got into debt. Over here, in the English version, they were millions of dollars in debt. So they asked their creditors to basically hold your horses, do us a favor, we're going to sell our real estate, and we're going to pay back. But the creditors said, no, you got to pay up immediately. They said, if we pay up immediately, we're not going to get a good price for our land. No, nothing doing. The government got involved. All 4 brothers were incarcerated from the 9th day of Shvat, 1882, until the 25th of Adar, 1883. I believe they were imprisoned in India. But what's incredible is, when the government got to the bottom of the story, and they looked at all the documents, and they confiscated the record books, and when the government looks in the books, all they saw was every single geschäft was under whose name? Yosef Chaim. So it seems like the government of India came and took the Ben Ish Chai and imprisoned the Ben Ish Chai. The Ben Ish Chai went to jail. And for how long did the Ben Ish Chai go to jail? For 30 days. And Rabbi Cheskel Ezra Shmaya writes that in jail, the Ben Ish Chai wrote a sefer. And what kind of sefer was it? A sefer of Kabbalah. And what's the name of the sefer? The same name of the sefer as the Ben Ish Chai says that Makubal wrote in jail, which is the sefer Matir Asura. So says Rabbi Cheskel Ezra Shmaya, let me just tell you a tradition that I have. That when the Ben Ish Chai in Parshas Lech Lecha gives a mashal about a guy who went to jail for 30 days and wrote a sefer of Kabbalah and released the neshamas of children in the stones of the prison cell, my tradition is this was not a mashal, this is autobiographical information that the Ben Ish Chai was writing about himself, as he usually does, that when he says Maisa b'chosid echad, he's talking about himself. So amazingly, the Ben Ish Chai sat in jail for 30 days. Now, why didn't the Ben Ish Chai write in the mashal, that was me? I mean, probably for good reason. You know, it probably does not look good on the... When I was a kid, I used to have... My grandmother gave me Gedolim pictures. So on the front, you have the picture. It's like a baseball card. And on the back, you have information. So I have not found on the statistics of any of the Mayetzes Gedolim Adora, their jail time. Probably doesn't look good. But more importantly, the Ben Ish Chai... Now, Rabbi Yaakov Hillel writes in a footnote that this Rabbi Cheskel Shraga Shemaya was not accurate, because the Ben Ish Chai sefer that he wrote in jail was not the sefer Matir Asurim. He just made up a name, Matir Asurim, as if, the name of the sefer he wrote in jail is "Let Me Out of Jail," but that's not the real name, because he wouldn't write the real name because he didn't want to give up his cover. And why didn't he want to give up his cover? So Rav Yecheskel Ezra Shmaya theorizes he didn't want to embarrass his brothers for getting him into this mess. Okay, so the bottom line is, the Ben Ish Chai did jail time. We're going to come to soon what the Ben Ish Chai did when he got out of jail, which is even more shocking. Okay, but as of now, the Ben Ish Chai spent 30 days in jail. Fine. Now, why did he spend 30 days in jail? How do we understand this? So, okay, he had to be there. He had to release souls in the stones, and he had to be meshachrer different children. In one of the official biographies of the Ben Ish Chai, if you look at number 5. It's called Zikaron L'Chaim. He brings down that when the Ben Ish Chai, Yosef, was 7 years old. And you're probably wondering to yourself, what in the world is the rabbi talking about? It's Erev Chanukah, it's Parsha Vayeishev, it's an interesting story, but nothing to do with the price of tea in Baghdad, right? But listen to this. When he was 7 years old, he was playing with his sister in the basement. And of course, they got into a little bit of a squabble, and the sister pushes him into the, I don't know, we'll put it in modern terms in 5 towns, the sump pump or something, into basically the pit, into a well. He fell into the well. He's drowning. He's on the verge of asphyxiating. They jump in. They save his life. They resuscitate him. And they pull Yosef out of the pit. They pulled Yosef Chaim out of the pit, and they saved his life. Well, in the Sefer Ketz HaYomin, which is one of the Talmidim of Reb Shimon Agassi, and we're going to get to Reb Shimon Agassi momentarily, he says there are striking parallels between the life of Yosef Hatzadik in Parshas Vayeishev and the life of the Ben Ish Chai. Namely, just like Yosef Hatzadik in jail, he was very productive, he was interpreting dreams, he was bringing the Dvar Hashem to the world, so too the Ben Ish Chai wrote an entire compilation while in jail. Furthermore, just like when Yosef was in jail, he found favor in the eyes of the warden and the eyes of all the people there. The Ben Ish Chai, when he was in jail, usually when someone goes to jail, I don't know, usually, not that I know exactly, but this is what they say. You go into the jail, and all the bullies come, right? And they come out with their knives, and they start up with you, and they harass you, and they antagonize you, at the very least, and it's a dangerous place. And the Ben Ish Chai walks in. Now, the Ben Ish Chai, one of the great miracles that always happened to him, is that, I don't know, when I speak on Shabbos morning, I'm wearing a talis. So I remember... the first thing I made sure is I get a non-slip talis, right? Because you speak, the talis goes flying. Even with a non-slip talis, the talis doesn't stay on. Slips. The Ben Ish Chai had his talis immaculately folded on his shoulders. It never moved, it never budged, it never wavered. And he walks into jail wearing probably 2 pairs of tefillin and a talis, and everyone was korea mishtachav eloi. Everyone was in awe of him. After all, if you look at his picture, it's a pretty... it looks like an eminent personality. You can look at it later. We have all kinds of pictures of the Ben Ish Chai, and almost all the Jews that lived in Baghdad, somewhere or another, are in this book somewhere. Okay, so if you have family in Baghdad, they're in here. Okay. Be it as it may, the Ben Ish Chai also found favor in the eyes of the warden, found favor in the eyes of the prisoners. Just like Yosef was thrown into a pit, the Ben Ish Chai fell into a pit when he was younger. Just like Yosef was very handsome, the Ben Ish Chai was a very strikingly handsome individual. Okay, so that's what we got so far. So comes the year 1909. The Ben Ish Chai passes away. Now I'll tell you something interesting. Where is the Ben Ish Chai buried? In Baghdad.
No, he's not.
He has a kever in Baghdad.
I was at his
So I'm not going to say I was at his kever in Baghdad, but in this book we have a picture of his kever in Baghdad. But Reb Sender is right. Yeah. Reb Sender is right, because I was also in Har HaZeisim, and I was at his kever 2 times, and it was one of the most elevating experiences to be at the kever of the Ben Ish Chai. Somebody even asked me, how did TorahAnytime put this beautiful backdrop behind the kever of the Ben Ish Chai of the Temple Mount with the blue sky? How did they do that? I said, Rabbi Yid, you don't realize Har HaZeisim is right in back of the Temple Mount. This is not production here. This is the way it looks. So the Ben Ish Chai has 2 kvarim. Now, usually somebody only needs 1 kever. People have a house in the 5 towns and then Florida. But that's when you're alive, you need 2 places. Most people don't need 2 kvarim, The summer kever, the winter kever, what's with the 2 kvarim? So there's a great degree of mystery as to where the Ben Ish Chai is buried. If you want to know more about it, TorahAnytime.com, we have a couple of shiurim on the subject. The bottom line is, even though nobody saw him be buried in Har HaZeisim, but many Mekubalim had dreams that he was buried in Har HaZeisim, the opinion of Rabbi Yitzchak Kaduri and Rabbi Mordechai Eliyahu that he is in fact buried on Har HaZeisim. Nobody saw it, that's what they say. So bear in mind, the Ben Ish Chai has 2 kvarim. Fine. Ben Ish Chai died in the year 1909. There was a great sage in Baghdad. His name was Reb Shimon Agassi. Okay, Reb Shimon Agassi was a great makubal from the time of his youth. Not related to Andres. Okay, and he most of his life he hid himself. He didn't want to benefit from the Kesser of Torah, and towards the end of his life, especially after the P'tir of the Ben Ish Chai, he sort of came out into the open, and he wrote a number of Svarim. He wrote the Sefer B'nai Aaron, which is a commentary of the Shar HaGagulim. He wrote Imrei Shimon on Tanakh. He wrote Shemi Shimon, Chidushim on the Eitz Chaim. He wrote Yesoidei HaTorah. He wrote Chizyonis V'Giluyim. And he was considered the Mamshech Darkei of the Ben Ish Chai. In the year, now, another interesting thing is, he had a stutter. He did not speak clearly. But that was until a certain point. Now, he was also the Rebbe of Rabbi Yehuda Fataya. Rabbi Yehuda Fataya was one of the great Mekubalim of Kabbalah Masas. Rabbi Yehuda Fataya is also buried on Har HaZeisim. Masas. We once spoke about Rabbi Yehuda Fataya. Fine. So at the Levaya of the Ben Ish Chai, or at one of his major Hespedim, Reb Shimon Agassi gets up to speak, and he says, to be at the Levaya of a tzaddik or an Adam Gadol is one of the most important events to be at in your entire existence. Why? Because if you're at the Levaya and you show kavod achrain to a great tzaddik, a great Talmid Chacham, that could be the greatest zechus of your whole life. Because the Arizal writes that the Gemara tells us that anyone who is at the Levaya of Rebbe, mezuman hu l'chaye olam haba. Can you imagine? You could have a guy who's an oisvar of Gomer. The guy is mamish, a Rasha, Shein Kamayu, and he went to Rebbe's Levaya, and he's, at the highest level of the heavens. The Arizal writes, mezuman l'chaye olam haba is the highest madrega. Well, says Reb Shimon Agassi, if anyone who went to Rebbe's Levaya is mezuman l'chaye olam haba, anyone who is at the Levaya of the Ben Ish Chai is mezuman l'chaye olam haba. Said, how do I know that? Says Reb Shimon Agassi, let me reveal to you a certain secret. I looked at the neshama of the Ben Ish Chai, and I detected that he's from the same root of the neshama of Rebbe. Rebbe and the Ben Ish Chai were the same source. And what source is that? Yesod. Yesod is one of the 10 spheros. And what source is the source Yesod? The source of Yesod is Yosef Hatzadik. Therefore, just like Yosef Hatzadik. So now, what's Reb Shimon Agassi saying? That the Shoresh HaNeshama of the Ben Ish Chai was similar to Rebbe, and they were both rooted in Yosef HaTzadik. Now we know Yosef HaTzadik knew all the languages, he knew all the disciplines, he knew all the chachmas. Likewise, the Ben Ish Chai was well versed in all branches of knowledge, all branches of wisdom, and all disciplines. Because the manifestation, the sphera of Yesod, is the foundation of all the spheros. All the spheros flow into Yesod. Therefore, like Yosef HaTzadik, the Ben Ish Chai was knowledgeable in all areas. And therefore, just like the Gemara says, that anyone who was at Rebbe's Levaya is mezuman l'chaye olam haba, anyone who attended the Levaya of the Ben Ish Chai is mezuman l'chaye olam haba.
Which
one? The real one. The one that happened in Baghdad. Now, but there were a lot of people who weren't able to attend because he was buried at midnight, which is probably what contributed to the mystery of where he was actually buried. He was buried at midnight, and what? Nobody saw it.
Why was he buried at midnight?
I guess, okay, we're going to see in a moment. Okay? Because he didn't die in Baghdad. So he was buried at midnight, and many people thought that they heard that the body was being brought, they figured he'd be buried the next day. So many people, it was too hard for them to get up at midnight. Many of them thought he was buried the next day. And afterwards they were terribly bitzar that they missed the Kfura of the Ben Ish Chai. Says Reb Shimon Agassi, anyone who wished they could have been at the Levaya and wasn't, also will go straight to Olam Haba. Why? Because just like the Gemara says in Ksubis, there was a certain launderer who, when he heard, we know that a Baskal went out at the Levaya of Rebbe, that says anyone who was at the burial of Rebbe goes straight to Olam Haba. And there was a certain launderer, he had a dry cleaning, and he missed the Rebbe's Levaya. He said, Ochen Vay, I can't believe it, I blew my whole life because I wasn't at the Levaya. He went up to the roof, he jumped off the roof, he committed suicide, and then the Baskal called out, the launderer is also going to Olam Haba. So we learned from there that anyone who was bitzar that they weren't at Rebbe's Levaya went to Olam Haba. Therefore, anyone who wished they could have been at the Levaya of the Ben Ish Chai also goes to Olam Haba. But those guys that when the Chacham Bashi said the Ben Ish Chai is being buried, they said, nah, we'll watch it on TorahAnytime tomorrow. Those people lost, they blew their whole life. They blew it. They could have been there alive, and they weren't there alive. They will not get Olam Haba, at least for that. Now, says Reb Shimon Agassi, since I'm revealing to you that the Ben Ish Chai came from the Shorish of Rabbi, now we understand why a mystery of the death of the Ben Ish Chai. Now, the Ben Ish Chai, in the end of his life, was not well. And he went to pray in the north of Iraq. I'm chalashing to go here, but even I won't go there. In the north of Iraq, you have an amazing kever, Yecheskel Hanavi. And I was blown away. There are amazing pictures in here of the building and the whole binyan around the kever of Yecheskel. Not only is Yecheskel buried there, Yeshua Kohen Gadol is buried there, Yoina is buried there, Ezra is buried there, Eoiv is buried there. In Bavel. They have pictures of this. It's amazing. No, they're just, what's the name of the septu? There's a name for the building over the grave. It's, what?
Dome?
No, it starts with an S, septunt. Okay, I'll show you over here. And the Ben Ish Chai went to a certain area called Chala. I believe it is in present-day Iran. And he died there. And they took him 2 days and they returned him to Baghdad, and supposedly he's buried in Baghdad. Why did the Ben Ish Chai have to go and die in one place and then be buried in another place? Says Reb Shimon Agassi, I'll tell you why. Because the exact same thing happened to Rabbi. Because Rabbi, at the end of his life, where did Rabbi live? Rabbi's lived in Beis Sha'arim. But he wasn't well in the end of his life, so he went to a place of pleasant air. Where did he go? He went to a high land. He went to Tzipori. He died in Tzipori. He was brought back to Beis Sha'arim to be buried in Beis Sha'arim. So just like Rebbe died in Tzipori and was brought to Beis Sha'arim, the Ben Ish Chai died in Chala and he was buried in Baghdad. Now, if I could add, somebody said, you're just going to tell over a story, you don't have any chidushim? I said, you could say chidushim on Lamdos, on Halacha. It's very hard to say chidushim on Galgulim, if you don't know anything about it. But I'll tell you one interesting chidush. Because when I was in yeshiva in Chavetz Chaim, I was 19 and a half years old. And like 3 o'clock in the morning, we did a Shabbos in the north. We were driving back, and we stopped off at the kever of Rabbi in Tzipori. And then last year I went to Eretz Yisrael, and I took people to the kever of Rabbi in Beis Sha'arim. So, well, wait a second. How did Rabbi get from Tzipori to Beis Sha'arim? And then I read, Rabbi has 2 kvarim. Rabbi has 2 kvarim. One of them is probably not real. The one in Tzipori, L'char, is not real. The one that I went to when I was a Bachar. Now, I remember when I went to Rabbi's kever as a Bachar, which is not his kever, I remember davening. I don't think I ever davened like that in my life. So it was a little bit deflating when I learned that he's not there, But and it's deflating in many ways. But it turns out that Rebbe has 2 kvarim. So it's interesting. If the Ben Ish Chai is the Gilgal of Rebbe, just like Rebbe has 2 graves, Ben Ish Chai has 2 graves in Baghdad and on Har HaZesim. Be it as it may, says Reb Shimon Agassi, that why was it that we know the Ben Ish Chai died in Chala, was brought to Baghdad, because Rebbe died in Tzipori and was brought to Beis Sha'arim. But why did Rebbe have to die in one place and be buried somewhere else? And the answer is you have to look back at the root. Who's the root of Rebbe? Yosef. Yosef died in Mitzrayim and he's buried in Shechem. So therefore it always goes back to the root. Since Yosef died in Mitzrayim and was buried in Shechem, Rebbe died in Tzipori, he was brought to Beis Sha'arim. Ben Ish Chai died in Baghdad, and he's brought to Har HaZesim, or he died in Chala, and he's brought to Baghdad. Fine, that's the story. Now, this Reb Shimon Agassi, what?
Have you been to Kever Yosef?
I haven't been there, no. And here I'll tell you another thing. Just like I haven't been to the kever of the Ben Ish Chai in Baghdad, I haven't been to Yosef's kever in Shechem. There you go.
You gotta go.
Why midnight? Probably he's coming from 2 days away, and that's when they got back, so they buried him, Okay. Now, we just mentioned that Reb Shimon Agassi couldn't speak, and here he is. He just gave a langa hesped. Reb Yitzchak Kaduri writes that from the moment the Chacham Reb Shimon Agassi was masped the Ben Ish Chai, his stutter was cured. Okay. Now, here let's go to the mother. Let's talk about the mother of the Ben Ish Chai for a moment. The mother of the Ben Ish Chai, she's mamis, what's the expression? Oiska hakta tzaras. She has 5 kids in jail. All her 4 businessmen kids are in jail. Her son, the Ben Ish Chai, is in jail. And the mother died at great aggravation on Zion of 1882. Now, Ben Ish Chai comes back. Ben Ish Chai has no money. He's an ani ve'avyain. Now I'm going to tell you something very interesting. The Ben Ish Chai opened up the door of his home, and he did not leave his home for 7 years. He did not give shiur for 7 years. He did not communicate with anyone for 7 years. He did not talk for 7 years. He did not eat for 7 years. He had no interaction with anyone for 7 years. Nobody knows what the Ben Ish Chai was doing from the day he got out of jail until 7 years later. Here, the Gadol Hadar went completely quiet for 7 years. He didn't talk, he didn't eat, he didn't give shiur, he didn't give drashas, he didn't write svarim, he didn't write letters. Now, the Ben Ish Chai wrote holiday cards to people every single year. He wrote Lashana Tova cards. We have all of his Lashana Tova cards that he sent all over the world. We have not one letter of the tens of thousands of documents that are now unearthed from the Ben Ish Chai. By the way, in Saddam Hussein's complex, I spoke about this, when the American army invaded Iraq in the Gulf War, Saddam Hussein's complex was flooded, and they brought in experts. Saddam Hussein collected all the manuscripts of antiquity, and the American army put away a whole chest of writing that they didn't think was they didn't think it was Jewish writing because it looked Arabic. Turned out, after years and years and years, they reopened it, and it was an entire chest of more chidushim of the Ben Ish Chai. So, courtesy of Saddam Hussein, over the last couple of years, many svarim have been printed of documents sitting in Saddam Hussein's compound. But we don't have one word that he wrote for 7 years. What was the Ben Ish Chai doing for 7 years? The only suggestion that is given is he was doing something called Tikkun HaKaneh. Now, what's Tikkun HaKaneh? In the English book, on page 164, it says that sometime during the younger years, Rabbi Yosef Chaim observed a rectification known as repentance of the Kaneh, which is carried out by a few rare pious individuals in every generation. This tikkun consists of fasting from dawn to nightfall for 6 years straight, secluding oneself in Torah study and prayer to weaken the evil inclination without leaving one's home. One cannot eat meat, eat anything of a living source, drink wine. One can only fast, learn Torah, fight, sleep, and eat just enough bread to sustain oneself. Only thing one could eat is bread, vegetables, and herbs. For 40 days, it's a deadly process, and after that, siyata d'shmaya, you'll be able to continue for 6 years. Okay, don't try this at home or anywhere else. Okay, it is suggested that the Ben Ish Chai conducted this Tikkun HaKaneh. Now, in the 7th year, he received word that his Rabbi and wife's uncle, Rabbi Abdullah Sameach, died. Now, Abdullah Sameach was a whole, if you want to know about him, there's a shiur about him. I have a shiur on him, Rabbi Abdullah Sameach. He is now buried in the entrance of the kever of Yeshua Kohen Gadol. And Rabbi Abdullah Sameach died. The Ben Ish Chai came out of his house. He was maspid him, and then he went back to giving shiur and teaching like nothing ever happened. Until recently, we didn't know any of this. This is recently discovered information. Okay, be it as it may, Ben Ish Chai comes out of jail. He's now an ani ve'evyain. While once he was a great nadvan, as we said, while once all of his svarim were on the family business, and he was mafarnes tamei chacham, he now had no income, had no source of livelihood, was not able to be mafarnes others, and his big problem is, how is he going to publish his svarim? So we have very interesting letters here. The Ben Ish Chai, even in his great poverty, never asked anybody for a penny, would not take a penny from anybody. But we have 2 letters where he writes that even though his personal his state of destitution was very acute, nevertheless, what bothered him the most was the fact that he was not able to publish his svarim. And particularly, we have a letter over here that he wrote to the chief rabbi of France, Reb Tzadok HaKohen, not to be confused with Reb Tzadok HaKohen. Okay? And that the Ben Ish Chai said, I have one possession and that is I have a Sefer Torah. The Sefer Torah was written in approximately the year 1700. A tiny Sefer Torah, written on paper as thin as an onion peel. And it's a very valuable Sefer Torah. It cannot be read publicly, it's too fragile, but it could be used to dance on Simchas Torah. And the Ben Ish Chai says, because I have no money to publish my Sfarim, I am going to sell it to I'm going to give it as a gift to Baroness Rothschild. In exchange, she's going to give me money. So you say, but how am I allowed to sell a Sefer Torah? I'm going to use that money to publish Sfarim. I'm not going to charge for the publication of the Sfarim. And in that sense, it's not considered being nene from a Sefer Torah. So amazingly, you see that the Ben Ish Chai started off life very wealthy, a great, a very generous man, a mefarnes others. And Nebuch, he was sat in jail for 30 days on trumped up charges. He was released. He was secluded then in solitary confinement for 7 years. And after that, he came out. One more connection to Parshas Vayeishev. Yosef and the Ben Ish Chai, yeah? There seems to be some connection between the two of them.
How long was Yosef?
Yosef was there for 22 years. Oh, in jail? What?
10, and then he got punished for something.
13 years?
12 for another 2 years.
He was there for quite a number of years.
Yosef was there for a little while. Look, not everything, is exactly... Okay, one last thing. It says that Yosef spoke Lashon Hara about the brothers. What did Yosef say about the brothers? He said that the brothers ate Iver min achai, the flesh of a living being. Really? Could that have been? Could the brothers really have eaten Iver min achai? Iver min achai is even asur to Bnei Noach. Did the brothers really consume Iver min achai? So the Imrei Emes learns a fantastic pshat. We know that tzaddikim, afilu b'misason, kruyim, Chaim. And the Gemara says, how do we know the righteous are considered alive even when they're dead? The pasuk, the Gemara in Brachos quotes, Shenemar ben ish chai. What do we call a tzaddik? Ben ish chai. What's Yosef? Yosef is a tzaddik. Says the Imrei Emes. Yosef is a tzaddik. So what is Yosef actually considered? Yosef is considered a ben ish chai. Now the brothers, were they learning from the tzaddik? Were they gaining from the tzaddik? Were they asking advice and learning Torah from Yosef? No! They were poiresh from the Ben Ish Chai. Says the Imrei Emes, when Yosef said the brothers ate Iver min achai, his kavanah was, they're poiresh from me because I am a Ben Ish Chai. Now I don't think the Imrei Emes meant that Yosef and the Ben Ish Chai shared the same soul, but based on what we're learning, there seems to have been some kind of mystical connection between Yosef HaTzadik, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, and the Ben Ish Chai. Okay, these are some of the neflois of the Torah Akdosha and the Hashgacha in the running of the world. And we learn from here that there's more than meets the eye. You see people, you see events, things happen to us. We don't know exactly what the cheshbonos are, but the Mesabiv Kol HaSvivos says to us, Lech Lecha, wherever I tell you to go, it's for you, it's for your benefit, it's for your toyelas, and it's for your ultimate hatzlacha. Vayeishev, have a great night.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.